Okay, so you know how we always encourage you to share sources that you find interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've really come through this time. You sent over Stuart McRobert weight training technique.
Oh, yeah, a classic.
Seriously, if you've ever even considered, picking up a weight, this deep dive is going to be gold.
Absolutely.
Our mission today is to extract the really crucial stuff from this book. And it's all about how to lift weights safely and effectively.
So you can actually get results and, more importantly, avoid getting hurt.
Right, because what's the point of pushing yourself if you end up sidelined with an injury?
Exactly. And, McRobert really drives this point home right from the beginning.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, he states that exercise technique is, like, the top priority.
They,
Even before you even think about, like, your program design, your nutrition, all that stuff comes later.
it's all about form first.
It really is. He actually mentions that potentially millions of people have had to quit weight training.
Wow, millions.
Yeah, because of pain and injuries caused by just bad form.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is our aim here is to make sure you're not one of them.
Right, to give you the knowledge to train safely so you can keep at it for years.
Exactly, for a lifetime, ideally.
So before we go too deep, let's give a little background on the book itself.
Sure.
It's published by CS Publishing Ltd. They've got offices in both Cyprus and Washington State.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you can actually find more info on their website, www.hardgainer.com.
Okay.
It was copyrighted in 1998, but, the edition we've got has reprints from their early 2000s.
Showing that this isn't just some, fly-by-night fitness trend. This is like established knowledge.
It stood the test of time, for sure.
Exactly. And what really struck me was the preface to the second edition.
Oh, yeah, what did McRobert say there?
Well, he doubles down on his emphasis on, safe exercises and perfect form.
Okay.
And what's interesting is he argues that the need for this kind of instruction is even greater today.
That's interesting because you'd think with all the information out there now it'd be the opposite.
Right. But he says, even with the rise of weight training, a lot of those old myths and harmful practices, they're still out there.
Yeah, I guess gym culture can perpetuate some bad habits.
Definitely. And he really wants to empower you, the reader, to take control of your own technique so you can reach your goals safely.
Those physique, strength, and fitness goals.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, with anything involving physical activity, safety's got to come first.
For sure.
So the book does have a safety warning and a disclaimer.
Of course.
It basically reminds you to check with your doctor and to proceed with caution.
It's always your responsibility to prioritize your health and safety.
Absolutely. We're here to discuss what's in the book, but ultimately you're the one in charge of your own well-being.
Exactly. So as we dive into this, keep that in mind.
So how does McRobert approach exercise selection? It seems like he's got a very specific philosophy.
He does. He takes a very, conservative approach.
Okay, in what sense?
Well, he really focuses on the exercises that offer the most benefit, while deliberately steering clear of ones that are risky or even just of questionable value.
Makes sense.
And he also avoids those that need, specialized equipment most people don't have access to.
Right, because not everyone's got a fully decked out home gym.
Exactly, or access to some high-end facility.
So he's keeping it practical.
He is, but there's one interesting exception.
What's that?
Grip training.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, he seems to think that dedicated grip work is so beneficial that he includes the best exercises for it, even though some might need specialized tools.
I guess that highlights just how much he values grip strength.
It definitely does.
So you mentioned those exercises with the most benefit. Where does McRobert stand on free weights versus machines?
Right. Well, this book is a huge advocate for free weights.
You mean like barbells and dumbbells?
Exactly. He really emphasizes their versatility and, when used correctly, their safety.
That's key when used correctly.
Absolutely. Because you can definitely get hurt with free weights if you don't know what you're doing.
Right. You need good form.
Exactly. And he contrasts that with machines, which, a lot of people find appealing.
Oh, yeah. Machines seem so user-friendly.
They do, and they can feel safer in terms of,
Right.
Immediate injury.
That,
But McRobert points out that those fixed movement patterns can actually be problematic.
oh, how so?
Well, because they might not match your individual body structure.
Okay, so they could lead to issues down the line.
They could, especially if you're using them consistently over time.
And I guess the quality of machines can vary a lot, too.
Huge variation. Some are much better designed than others.
So he doesn't completely rule out machines?
No, he actually makes a distinction between different types.
Interesting. What's the difference?
Well, think of it like this. You've got machines with fixed grooves that lock you into one specific path.
Okay.
And then you've got cable-based machines that allow for a bit more freedom of movement.
It's like a lat pull down versus a fixed arm pull over machine.
Exactly.
The cable gives you more option.
He even acknowledges that some top-tier machines can be excellent.
Like what brands are we talking about?
Well, he specifically mentions Cybex, Hammer Strength, MedX, Nautilus, True Squat. Those are some of the big names.
Those are all like high-end brands though, right?
They are. You're not likely to find those at your average gym.
Which is probably why he focuses mainly on free weights.
It is. Those are more widely accessible to people.
Makes sense. And I guess you don't need a ton of fancy equipment to get a good workout.
That's another point he makes. He actually argues that the most important equipment is often the most basic.
So things like,
Power racks, squat racks, those are the essentials.
so maybe having a minimalist setup isn't a bad thing.
He seems to think so. He even suggests that all the bells and whistles in a fully equipped gym can be a distraction.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the latest trends and gadgets, but sometimes the simple stuff is the most effective.
Back to basics.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned earlier that McRobert makes an exception for grip training.
Right.
And I'm curious because he also talks about some other less common tools like the trap bar, cambered bars, and thick bars.
He does.
What's the thinking behind that? Is he saying everyone needs to rush out and buy these things?
Not necessarily, but he does highlight their value, especially in the context of progressive overload.
That's the idea of constantly challenging yourself by gradually increasing the weight or resistance you're lifting.
Exactly. And he's adamant that progressive overload with good form, especially in those big multi-joint exercises, is absolutely crucial for seeing real results.
So those are the exercises that work multiple muscle groups at the same time, like squats, deadlifts.
Precisely. Those are the foundation of a good training program.
And he emphasizes this isn't just for bodybuilders or powerlifters.
No, he believes that even if your goal is just general fitness,
Okay.
those compound movements should be the core of your training.
They're the most efficient way to get stronger and build muscle.
And burn calories, too, which is important for overall fitness.
So where do isolation exercises fit in?
Right. Well, he tackles this head on because there's this common idea that you need to isolate every muscle group to build a balanced physique.
Yeah, I've heard that you need to do like tons of different exercises to hit every ankle.
Exactly. And while he acknowledges that some people might see results that way,
Right.
he's very clear that most people would progress much faster by focusing on those compound movements.
So those big multi-joint exercises are the priority.
They are, but that doesn't mean isolation exercises are useless.
So he does include them in the book.
He does, but their purpose is very specific.
What that?
To develop balanced muscular strength that helps prevent injuries and improve your performance in those bigger compound lifts.
So they're like supporting actors.
Exactly. They play a role, but they're not the stars of the show.
And I'm guessing he's not a fan of those really trendy or specialized exercises.
Not really. He calls them out specifically.
Yeah, what does he say about them?
He basically says that a lot of them offer very little real benefit and often carry a higher risk of injury.
So it's all about focusing on what works and what's safe.
Exactly. And he really pushes back against this more is better mindset.
You mean the idea that you need to do as many exercises as possible?
Right. He argues that trying to isolate every tiny muscle just leads to overtraining and puts unnecessary stress on your joints.
And that can actually hinder your progress.
It definitely can, and it increases your risk of getting hurt.
So his philosophy is more about quality over quantity.
Absolutely. It's about training smarter, not harder.
Which brings us to our next topic, exercise form and how it relates to avoiding injuries.
Right, because you can do all the right exercises, but if your form is bad,
You're asking for trouble.
you are. And McRobert stresses this over and over again.
So how does he define good form?
Well, he goes into a lot of detail, but one fundamental aspect is rep speed.
How fast or slow you perform each repetition.
Exactly. He's a big advocate for slower, controlled tempos.
Okay.
He believes it's much safer and just as effective, if not more so, for most people.
Interesting. So he's not a fan of those explosive movements you see some people doing.
He's cautious about them. He says that while some elite athletes can handle that kind of training for most people, it's just too risky.
Yeah, the risk-reward ratio isn't there.
Exactly. Why take the chance of getting hurt when you can achieve great results with a more controlled approach?
And he also talks about the importance of breathing.
Oh, yeah. That's another crucial element.
What specifically does he say?
He emphasizes exhaling during the concentric or lifting phase of each rep,
Okay.
especially in those big compound exercises like squats and deadlifts.
Why is that so important?
It helps regulate your internal pressure and prevents things like blackouts or headaches.
Huh. I never thought about that.
Yeah, it's easy to forget about breathing when you're focused on lifting heavy weight.
And he also points out that it's okay to breathe through your mouth during intense exercise.
You got to get enough oxygen.
Right.
And this might sound obvious, but he also stresses the need for 100% concentration during your training.
So no checking your phone between sets?
Exactly. He's really against casual training. He says that even a momentary lapse in focus can lead to form breakdown and injury.
So treat your workouts with respect.
Absolutely. Give them your full attention.
Now, I've heard this term ego lifting. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's something McRobert cautions against strongly.
Okay, what is it?
It's basically trying to lift more weight than you're capable of, or continuing a set when your form starts to fall apart.
So it's letting your ego get in the way of safe training.
Exactly, and he specifically warns against going too heavy on exercises that you're not completely comfortable with.
Especially if you haven't mastered the proper form yet.
Right, and he also says to be wary of anyone encouraging you to push beyond your limits when your form is compromised.
So don't be afraid to say no if someone's pushing you too hard.
Exactly. Listen to your body.
So we've talked about rep speed, breathing concentration, and avoiding ego lifting.
Mm.
What else does McRobert emphasize for good form?
Flexibility.
Oh yeah, that's important for any kind of physical activity.
Absolutely, and he points out that certain exercises require a good degree of flexibility in very specific areas.
Like which ones?
Well, for squats and deadlifts, you need good flexibility in your Achilles tendons, hamstrings, adductors, glutes, shoulders, and even your chest.
Wow, it's a lot.
It is, and he explains how a lack of flexibility in those areas can directly impact your form and lead to injury.
Like, for example?
Well, if your hamstrings are too tight, you might round your lower back when you squat, which puts a lot of stress on your spine.
Ouch, that doesn't sound good.
It's not. So he really stresses the importance of incorporating regular stretching into your routine.
Now let's talk about shoes. What kind of footwear does McRobert recommend?
Well, he's pretty specific about this.
Okay, what does he say?
He recommends solid, sturdy shoes with good grip, proper arch support, and a standard heel height.
So those super cushioned running shoes are out.
They're not ideal. He says that a thick, unstable sole can actually compromise your stability and form.
Especially during those exercises where you need a solid base, like squats.
Exactly, and he also reminds you to replace your shoes when they wear out.
That makes sense.
And to always keep your laces tied. You don't want your foot slipping out from under you mid-lift.
Definitely not speaking of safety. What about the role of a spotter?
Oh yeah, McRobert is adamant about having a spotter for those heavy compound lifts.
So squats, bench presses, overhead presses.
Exactly. Those are the ones where a failed rep could be really dangerous.
So what qualities should you look for in a spotter?
He says they need to be alert, serious about their role, and strong enough to assist if needed.
Makes sense. You don't want someone who's easily distracted or can't handle the weight.
And he also details the correct spotting technique.
How that?
Using two hands in a balanced way to provide support without interfering with the lifter's movement.
So even spotting is a skill.
It is, and it's important to have a spotter who knows what they're doing.
Now what about foot placement before you even start lifting?
That's crucial. McRobert emphasizes planting your feet firmly and symmetrically on a non-slip surface.
So you've got a stable base.
Exactly, because if your foot slips out from under you when you're lifting heavy weight, that can be a recipe for disaster.
So it's all about setting yourself up for success before you even touch the bar.
Precisely.
And you mentioned symmetry. Is that important for all exercises?
Well, unless you're specifically doing one-sided exercises to address an imbalance,
Okay.
he stresses the importance of lifting symmetrically.
So using both sides of your body equally.
Exactly, because favoring one side puts uneven stress on your muscles and joints, which increases your risk of injury.
So it's all about maintaining balance?
It is both in terms of how you lift and the development of your body.
Okay, now let's talk about warming up. How does Robert approach that?
He's very clear that warming up properly is non-negotiable.
It's not something you skip?
Definitely not. He recommends starting with a general low-intensity warm-up.
Okay, like some light cardio.
Exactly, to get your blood flowing and your muscles ready for action.
And then
you move on to exercise-specific warm-up sets using lighter weights.
I guess that helps you practice the movement and make sure your form is good.
Precisely. And he also mentions something called the pause test.
What's that?
It's basically pausing briefly at the bottom of your warm-up reps
Okay.
to ensure you're in control and your form is solid.
So it's a check-in to make sure you're not using momentum.
Exactly. And he also advises staying warm between your work sets.
So don't just sit around and chat on your phone.
Right. Keep moving. Keep those muscles warm and loose.
Good advice. Now, what about weight selection? That seems like it could be tricky.
It can be, and it's another area where people often go wrong.
How so?
Well, McRobert stresses the importance of using comfortable weights when you're first learning an exercise.
Okay, so don't try to jump in with too much weight too soon.
Exactly. Focus on mastering the form first, and then you can gradually increase the weight.
And he also talks about weight selection for your working sets.
He does. He says you should choose a weight that allows you to complete all your target reps with perfect form.
That makes sense.
And he acknowledges that you might need to reduce the weight you're used to lifting when you first start focusing on improving your technique. But he assures you that your long-term strength gains will surpass your previous levels once you've built a solid foundation of good form.
So it's a short-term sacrifice for long-term gains.
Patience is key.
You know, it's interesting. McRobert seems to encourage a certain mindset when it comes to weight training.
Oh yeah, how so?
Well, he talks about appreciating the feel of the weight, the mental focus it demands.
Does he even suggest that allowing your hands to toughen up naturally without relying on gloves can enhance that connection?
Huh. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, and he also recommends using chalk as your primary grip aid.
I guess that helps you really grip the bar.
It does, and he's a big proponent of incorporating grip and forearm work into your training.
It makes sense. Grip strength is important for so many exercises.
It is. It's often the limiting factor in how much weight you can lift.
So don't neglect your grip.
Definitely not.
Now, what if you're having some physical issues that are impacting your form? What does McRobert advise?
Well, if you're experiencing any foot problems that are affecting your squats or deadlifts, he recommends seeing a podiatrist.
Okay. A foot specialist.
Exactly. And for more complex issues where your individual body structure might be influencing how you should perform certain exercises,
Okay.
he recommends seeking guidance from a biomechanics or manipulative therapy expert.
Not just any expert.
No, ideally someone who understands weight training and is a weightlifter themselves.
So they can relate to your experience.
Exactly. They can assess your form and suggest modifications based on your unique needs.
That's great advice. I guess finding the right expert can be really helpful.
It can be because they can provide personalized guidance that you might not get from a general fitness professional.
And McRobert also includes a helpful resource in the book.
What's that?
A list of major muscle groups.
Oh, yeah, that's a good reference point.
It helps you understand which muscles are being targeted by different exercises.
Definitely. And he also recommends investing in high-quality training shoes that have molded internal soles.
What's the benefit of that?
Well, it provides better foot stability and supports your overall posture during lifts.
Makes sense. Good footwear is crucial for any kind of physical activity.
Absolutely, especially when you're lifting heavy weights.
Now, we've talked a lot about improving form, but what about maintaining it once you've made those changes?
Right. Well, McRobert emphasizes the importance of patience.
Okay.
He suggests taking a step back from your usual training intensity when you're first implementing form changes.
So maybe reduce the weight you're lifting.
Exactly, and focus on practicing and ingraining the new form.
And then gradually increase the weight again.
Right. But the key is to remain uncompromising about perfect technique even when you're adding weight.
Because it's easy to slip back into old habits.
It is, especially when the weight gets challenging. He cautions that progress might feel slower initially, but it's worth it in the long run.
So it's a long game.
It is consistency, and perfect form will ultimately lead to greater strength and muscle gains than trying to rush the process.
That makes sense. So McRobert gives general advice on form, but does he get into specifics for certain exercises?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Well, let's start with the bench press.
Okay. One of the most popular exercises.
It is, and he's very meticulous about describing the correct bar path.
The path the bar should travel during the lift.
Exactly. He says it shouldn't just go straight up and down from your shoulders.
I've got a curve to it.
It does. It should follow a slight arc touching your chest somewhere between your mid-pecs and your clavicles.
Interesting.
And he also talked about optimal hand spacing.
Aiming for your forearms to be vertical when the bar is at your chest.
Exactly. And he warns against excessively arching your lower back, which can put a lot of strain on your spine.
Right. I've seen people do that where their back is almost off the bench.
It's a common mistake, and it can lead to injury.
And of course, having a good spotter is essential.
Absolutely. He emphasizes the importance of a single competent spotter who uses both hands to provide balanced assistance.
Okay, so no trying to spot with one hand while checking your phone with the other.
Definitely not safety first.
So what about the squat? What are McRobert's key points there?
Well, he starts with proper bar placement across your upper back.
So the bar should rest on your traps and rear delts.
Exactly. And he gives detailed guidance on foot, positioning both the width between your heels and the degree to which your toes are pointed outward.
Okay.
He actually suggests experimenting to find the stance that feels most natural and stable for your body.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all. Everyone's built differently.
Right.
And he emphasizes maintaining a flat or neutral back throughout the entire movement.
So no rounding your lower back.
Exactly. That's a major no-no.
What about depth? How low should you go?
Well, he says you should squat to a depth where your hip crease is below your knee,
Okay.
but without your lower back rounding at the bottom.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where you're getting a good range of motion without compromising your form.
Exactly. And he strongly advises against using boards or plates under your heels.
Oh yeah, I've seen people do that.
It's a common practice, but he argues that it alters the mechanics of the movement and can actually increase your risk of injury.
Interesting.
And he's also not a fan of squatting in the Smith machine.
Why is that?
He says the fixed bar path can force your body into unnatural positions.
So it's better to stick with free weights.
If possible, he believes they allow for a more natural and safe movement pattern.
What about deadlifts? That's another big compound exercise.
It is, and McRobert has a lot to say about it.
Okay, let's start with the bent-legged deadlift.
Right. Well, he emphasizes the importance of establishing a proper grip on the bar,
Okay.
including using a mixed or reverse grip for heavier sets.
So one hand over hand and the other underhand.
Exactly. That helps prevent the bar from rolling out of your hand.
I can see how that would be important.
Especially when you're lifting a lot of weight.
All right, so grip is crucial.
It is, and he also stresses keeping the barbell close to your legs throughout the lift.
So don't let it drift away from your body.
Right. That puts a lot of stress on your lower back.
And he mentions retracting your shoulder blades.
Yes. That's about engaging your upper back muscles to help maintain a stable and safe lifting position.
So it's not just about using your legs.
Definitely not. Your whole body is involved in the deadlift.
Now, what about the stiff-legged deadlift? Is that one he recommends?
Well, he actually advises against performing the full range of motion version of that exercise.
Oh, well, why is that?
He considers it to be quite risky, especially for your hamstrings and lower back.
Okay, so it's not for beginners.
Definitely not. And even if you do attempt it, he stresses keeping your legs as straight as possible with just a slight bend at the knees
And
maintaining a completely flat back throughout the movement.
So no rounding.
Absolutely not. And he also emphasizes keeping the bar very close to your legs.
So the same principles apply for both the bent-legged and stiff-legged deadlift.
They do, just with slightly different emphasis depending on the variation.
Now, what about the overhead press? Another classic exercise.
It is, and McRobert acknowledges that a minimal but natural arch in the lower back is acceptable during this lift.
Okay, so a slight arch is okay.
It is as part of a stable weight-bearing position, but excessive hyperextension of the lower back should be avoided.
So don't go overboard with the arch.
Exactly. You want to keep your core engaged and your spine in a safe position.
Makes sense. And he also discusses the pros and cons of using dumbbells versus a barbell for the overhead press.
He does. He points out that dumbbells allow for a greater range of motion and can help correct any muscle imbalances.
Okay.
But they can also be more challenging to control, especially as the weight gets heavier.
So a barbell might be a better choice for beginners.
It could be, or for when you're lifting very heavy weight.
And he also covers some exercises that might seem more straightforward, like calf raises.
Right. He doesn't neglect those smaller muscle groups.
Okay, so what are his key points for calf raises?
Well, he emphasizes keeping your back straight and your torso completely rigid throughout the movement.
So no swaying or using momentum.
Exactly. You want to isolate the calf muscles as much as possible.
Right, and he advises against doing one-legged barbell calf raises.
He does, because the balance challenge is significant and the potential for injury is high.
So it's better to stick with a more stable variation.
Especially if you're new to calf raises.
And what about abdominal exercises, like crunches?
Yeah, those are important for core strength.
So what does McRobert say about them?
Well, he stresses that the focus should be on a controlled flexion of your spine, bringing your rib cage towards your pelvis.
So it's not just about lifting your torso up.
Exactly. It's about engaging the abdominal muscles specifically.
And he warns against jerky, uncontrolled movements and using too much weight.
He does, because that can strain your neck or lower back.
So it's better to focus on quality reps, even if you have to use less weight?
Exactly. And he also talks about bicep curls, another popular exercise.
Oh yeah, everyone wants bigger biceps.
Right. Well, he recommends optimal hand spacing on the bar or dumbbells.
Okay.
And he points out that using dumbbells allows for a fuller range of motion and a more natural rotation of the wrist.
So dumbbells might be preferable to barbells for bicep curls.
They could be, especially if you're focused on full muscle development.
And he debunks a common myth about preacher curls,
What's that?
that they somehow lengthen your biceps.
Yeah, that's not anatomically possible.
So it's more about targeting the muscle from a different angle.
Exactly. And he also covers rows, both dumbbell rows and cable rows.
Okay, those are great back exercises.
They are. And he stresses using the correct grip to target the intended back muscles.
Okay.
And actively pulling with your back, squeezing your shoulder blades together at the end of the movement.
So it's not just about using your arms.
Definitely not. Your back should be doing the work.
And he emphasizes maintaining a flat and stable back throughout the exercise.
Right. No rounding your back.
What about pull-downs and pull-ups? Those are both great exercises for your lats.
They are, and he discusses different grip options, including supinated, pronated, and parallel grips.
So palms facing away or palms facing each other.
Exactly. And importantly, he strongly advises against pulling the bar behind your neck.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that can be bad for your shoulders.
It increases your risk of shoulder impingement.
So it's better to keep the bar in front of you.
Absolutely safer and just as effective.
Now, what about shrugs? Those are typically done to target the traps.
They are. And McRobert explains that the focus should be on a controlled upward and backward rotation of your shoulders.
So you're trying to touch your ears with your rear shoulders.
Exactly. Not just shrugging straight up.
Interesting. And he also cautions against certain machine shrug variations.
He does, because they can force your body into unnatural positions.
So free weights might be a better choice for shrugs.
In most cases, he believes they allow for more natural and safe movement.
Now, even an exercise like side bends, which seems pretty simple,
Right?
he provides specific form cues.
He emphasizes a slow, controlled lateral flexion of the torso, avoiding any twisting movement.
Okay, so just pure side-to-side bending.
Exactly. And he also cautions against pushing to failure on this exercise.
Why is that?
Well, it's a relatively isolated movement, and going to failure can put a lot of strain on your obliques.
So it's better to stop a rep or two short of failure.
Exactly. Err on the side of caution.
Now, you mentioned grip training earlier. Does McRobert dedicate a whole section to that?
He does. He considers it to be very important.
Okay. What kind of grip training exercises does he recommend?
Well, he talks about using a grip machine if you have access to one.
Okay.
And pinch grip exercises where you're basically pinching plates or other objects together.
Interesting.
And the wrist roller, where you roll a weight up and down a bar using only your forearms.
I've seen those.
And thick bar holds, where you simply hold onto a thick bar for as long as you can.
That sounds challenging.
It is. It's a great way to build grip strength and endurance.
And of course, he emphasizes using chalk.
Absolutely. Chalk is essential for grip training.
Now, what about the breathing pullover? I haven't heard of that one.
Right. Well, it's a bit of a controversial exercise.
In what sense?
Some people believe it can expand your rib cage.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but the evidence is mixed.
So does McRobert recommend it?
He includes it in the book, but he's cautious about it.
Okay.
He says it might be beneficial for younger trainees, but the key is to use very light weights and focus on the breathing component of the exercise.
So it's more about improving your breathing capacity than building muscle.
Exactly. And he also covers back extensions.
Okay. Those are good for strengthening your lower back.
They are, and he emphasizes performing them with a controlled range of motion.
So no jerky movements.
Right. And he also warns against hyperextension at the top of the movement.
So don't go too far back.
Exactly. You want to feel the stretch in your lower back, but not to the point of pain.
And what about neck exercises?
He's very cautious about those.
Why is that?
Because the neck is a vulnerable area and it's easy to get injured.
So he recommends avoiding them.
Not entirely, but he stresses using very light progressive resistance with small weight plates.
So start slowly and gradually increase the weight.
Exactly, and be very mindful of your form.
Now, are there any other exercises he highlights?
Well, he talks about the overhead lockout, which is basically the top portion of the overhead press.
Yep.
And he recommends performing it safely within a power rack, or if you're using a Smith machine, to be very careful about your form.
So it's an advanced exercise.
It can be, especially when you're using heavy weight.
And he also covers the leg press.
He emphasizes pushing through your heels rather than your toes.